your source for news, commentary, discussion, and debate at the intersection of the atheist movement and the LGBT rights movement. This is the Atheist Manifesto. From Answer Media, this is the Atheist Manifesto. I'm your host, Callie Wright, and Ari isn't here today because they're off with some silly boy. Moral of the story, boys are gross and are the reason that Ari is not here. Therefore, not a fan. Anyways, first up this week, we are finally doing a story on intersex issues. This is something I have wanted to do forever, and finally was able to find folks who are willing and enthusiastic to talk about their lives and their experiences. So I think the first and most obvious question here is, what exactly does intersex mean? Here's intersex activist Amanda Sines to explain.
It describes a body that lies outside of what we consider to be the gender binary, right? Like, so a body that isn't necessarily entirely physically male or entirely physically female. Intersex is sort of like, if we think about, these two forms of bodies on a spectrum, intersex sort of like fills in the gap between the two. Intersex could mean someone who has ambiguous genitalia, or a phenotype, or the expression of your body that looks like it conforms to someone's idea of a sexed body, but then might actually have different sex chromosomes. It could be something that's hormonal. It's a very broad term that specifically deals with biological sex.
The TLDR version? If transgender is an umbrella term that describes a range of identities related to gender, intersex is an umbrella term that describes the spectrum of biological sex. Another intersex person I spoke with, Samantha Shanti, puts it even more succinctly.
Intersex is that problematic version of reality where you're not actually trans and you're not actually the gender they kind of, in my case, forced me to try and be.
It's tough to know exactly how many intersex people there are in the world for various reasons.
Another, a really fun anecdote is to say that there are, just about the same amount of intersex people as there are people with red hair. I know that I have friends who have red hair, maybe two. The general number that we like to throw out is 1 in 2,000 births, which honestly, that's a pretty sizable amount of the population. But then there are even other studies that, depending on the parameters, go up to even 2% of the population. Because, even though we have this term for intersex, there are sort of, still other, body types that could, depending on your definition of the term, fit into the umbrella.
Amanda was diagnosed when they were 13. For reasons that will become clear in the story you're about to hear, it's important to note that Amanda was assigned female at birth.
When I was born, there was something to indicate that I might have been intersex. I was diagnosed when I was 13 with partial androgen insensitivity syndrome. For me, the way that my condition works is that... I said androgen insensitive, right? And androgens are basically another name for testosterones, male hormones. But the testosterones that we're exposed to in utero are different than the ones that we produce and experience when we're teenagers. So, even though I had sex chromosomes and I was coded to be physically male, my body didn't respond to it while I was developing in the womb. Fast forward 12, 13 years to puberty, my body starts, my testes start producing the hormone that I am sensitive to, so that's why my puberty was a little bit more, masculine. There's actually a really funny story here. So I was 13, and I was going through puberty, and I think by this point I had already, gone through at least 2 different rounds of sex ed for middle schoolers. My body... going through puberty was not doing what I was expecting it to do. It was not doing what, my 8th grade biology teacher said it should do. There was this one time when I was playing football with some friends, and this is the real kicker for me, no pun intended. A friend of mine, tossed me a ball, and I caught it just, the utterly, wrong way. I basically just, I should have just, had, a bullseye around my genitals, because, that is exactly where the ball went. And Like, I was in so much pain. I threw the ball back and I was like, you know what? Cheers, guys. I'm gonna go to the bathroom real quick. And, I collapsed in this stall. And there was something I was 13 years old, and there was something very instinctual about this where I just knew that this wasn't necessarily right. So I went home and I talked to my mother about this event, and she was concerned and really curious about why I reacted this way. And so at that point I was like, you know what, I actually think there's actually something developing in my pubic area, because a couple months leading up to this event, I'd noticed that there were these kind of small lumps developing in my pubic area. So I showed them those, and my mother, being a mother who's she's a very extroverted, will say whatever kind of a person, she gives me a little pat down, and she's like, oh honey, I know what those are. I just lost my shit. I was like, I don't need to know that you know what these are. Basically what was going on was that my gonads were trying to descend. They were masculinized. I had kind of underdeveloped testes, but they were within my abdominal wall, and testicles do not like being inside of an abdominal wall, so they were herniating a little bit, trying to get outside of my body essentially. And that was the catalyst. That was what got this whole train rolling. And I think within a week I was at my family practitioner's office, and then after that I was seeing a specialist and getting blood tests, and 2 months after that I had a gonadectomy, which basically means that I had my gonads removed. I was never told that I was intersex, and for a while I wasn't really even told what these doctors were looking for. And that kind of makes sense, because intersex is something that's it's a really delicate issue. You don't want to give someone the wrong idea. You don't want to give any patient the wrong idea about something that might be going on with their health until you know definitively. So I'm a little bit forgiving in that sense.
Samantha's journey was much longer.
In my case, I was born, they weren't entirely certain what I was. They kind of forced me down a path. They assigned me male at birth, and a lot of really, really bad conditioning and testosterone, which I was deathly allergic to, which is one of the things that sometimes happens with various versions of CAH.
Samantha has CAH. CAH stands for congenital adrenal hyperplasia. It's a group of inherited genetic disorders that affect the adrenal glands. CAH affects the production of steroid hormones that regulate your body's response to illness or stress, the hormone that regulates your sodium and potassium levels, or testosterone. In many cases, CAH results in lack of cortisol and overproduction of testosterone.
The body can't handle testosterone or process it. So you can have people with XY chromosomes whose bodies don't process testosterone at all, and they develop and grow up completely female. And it's only much later they find out that they're intersexed. The first indications that I was intersexed were, of course, when I responded atypically to extremely low doses of estrogen. Unfortunately, because of the circumstances at the time, I didn't have insurance coverage commensurate with getting the tests done that I needed to find out what exactly was going on. And not that I'm advocating doing this by any stretch of the imagination, but by the time I actually got to seeing a doctor, I'd already been on HRT for a while. I started DIY, as many in the community are kind of forced to do. And so by the time I got to a doctor, there was a lot of confusion. By the time I got up to 1 milligram of estrogen a day, I had B cups, which, from what I understand, is unheard of.
She's not wrong. I have B cups after 3 or so years of a 4 milligram estrogen dose. Different people react differently, of course, but the kind of change Samantha describes is relatively unheard of. Samantha did eventually get insurance that would cover the testing she needed.
And so scheduled the tests, put me in the hospital, had the tests, waited on pins and needles for a month, and then got the news. Started on prednisone that day, and my life changed so dramatically. I can't even begin to express how that felt.
With something as complex, nuanced, and just plain not talked about as intersex, there are plenty of opportunities for misunderstanding and misconception. I was curious what the sort of most common misconceptions seem to be about intersex people. Here's Samantha again.
the most common misconception is that intersex doesn't exist.
We live in a world that is positively desperate to force people into binaries. Gender, sexuality, biological sex, so on and so forth. Our culture, and maybe our species, is simply more comfortable when we only have two choices. Intersex people face the direct consequences of these ideas. One misconception that I'd heard people repeat quite often is that being intersex means that a person can't enjoy sex or sexuality. Amanda Stein set me right on that.
Oh, yeah, that's... Whew. I can tell you firsthand that's not true. But, okay, so, like, but it's also, like, it is a very serious issue. It's a very serious question because there are people who can't, who... I guess have been denied access to their sexuality. A lot of, IGM surgeries, intersex genital mutilation surgeries, result in, I guess, like a loss of pleasurable sensation completely.
This brings us to a very, very serious issue faced by intersex people. Often, when a child is born with ambiguous genitalia, surgery is done to quote-unquote correct their genitals to match whichever the doctor thinks is correct. That's horrifying. And while parents sometimes make these decisions on behalf of their child, often it's the doctor who uses their position of authority to influence the parent into doing what they want. After all, most parents just want what's best for their child, and if the doctor says, here's a thing that's wrong with your kid and here's what we want to do to fix it, I think parents can be kind of forgiven for being scared into doing exactly what the doctor tells them to.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that, like, the locus of power isn't on the parent in that situation. I think it has more to do with the doctor kind of, like, influencing the parent. Because a parent just, like, wants the best for their child. And, like, most parents who, like, who have intersex children want the best for their child, but they also, like, don't know enough about intersex to, like, to address it in any kind of, like, healthful way. That maintains, like, their child's well-being. So they defer to the doctor's experience, right? And, like, yeah, and I mean, like, there are parents who feel like they have ownership over their children. I think, like, right now there's a huge conversation over that where, I forget the specifics, but I think a friend of mine, like, introduced a bill into the Texas Senate where their goal is to outlaw intersex genital mutilation. And then there's, like, the counter bill that's, like, from a parent's perspective where they're like, these people are trying to take away, like, our say in this whole process and of helping our child determine their sex. And that's, like, that's all, like, that just like makes me sigh, because, like, no one's excluding a parent's, like, say in what they want their child, in their child's healthcare. I mean, like, a parent should obviously be a really integral part in helping to make a decision about their child's healthcare. I think a lot of the issues that have, like, arisen within the intersex community are because a parent's voice is taken away from a doctor who's in a position of power over them. So, like, I mean, like, the politics of, like, self-ownership and self-determination with intersex people is, like, it's really freaking complicated.
Intersex people, as you can probably imagine, often end up having complicated relationships with their doctors. Finding the right doctor, though, can mean finally getting some answers to some very important questions. Here's Samantha again.
Well, the oh my God, that all makes sense actually came in 2012, well after I was completely post-transition, had already had, an amount of surgery that was applicable to my particular situation. And I'd actually gone to see an endocrinologist because I couldn't lose weight at all, no matter what I did. And I was exercising like a lunatic. I was, keeping very careful control of food. And, oh, hey, I'm in a room full of Star Trek fans. Do you remember Nancy Crater, McCoy's ex-girlfriend, who turned out to be the last of her species, a salt vampire? Well, you're looking at a real-life salt vampire. I go through, frankly, astonishing amounts of salt. And so I wind up, my GP here in Ohio sends me to an endocrinologist to try and figure out what my weight problems were, what my sleep problems were, and to see if we could finally figure out what the deal was with salt. Because if I maintain a diet that's appropriate for most people, I wind up in adrenal crisis. I get violently ill and could wind up dying because my body doesn't retain salt the way it does in typical human beings. So I go to this endocrinologist. She's a wonderful woman. And, you know, my entire life has been a series of doctor after doctor after doctor in multiple disciplines saying, well, we're not sure what's wrong with you. Frankly, we're not even sure why you're alive. You know, I sit and we're going through my life story with my endocrinologist, and she said, well, I'll be, and I went, no, please, please, not again. I can't hear it again. She said, what? And I said, I've been hearing all my life. I don't know what's wrong with you. I'm not even sure why you're alive. That's not what I was going to say. I'm like, okay, what were you going to say? She said, well, I'll be stunned if you're not CAH. And I went, wait, what? She said, frankly, if I'm right and there's nothing about what you've told me to tell me anything, you know, to tell me otherwise. If I'm right, I'm frankly, astonished that you are alive, but probably not for the reasons that you're used to hearing, because if you do have the version of CAH that I believe you do, or one of them, you shouldn't have lived past your 6th birthday.
Amanda's experiences have been largely positive. They credit their living in mostly liberal areas for that. But healthcare can be, and often is, a struggle for intersex folks.
I've had friends who have experienced trauma in the examination room. I've had friends who fought with their doctors. I have friends who have spent years looking to find a doctor that is going to understand their reality and that they can feel comfortable with. One of the quips that we like to say in the intersex community is that intersex people get surgeries that they don't want, and trans people are denied access to surgeries that they need. I wouldn't call it a privilege per se, but I have much easier access to HRT than some of my trans friends because I'm intersex, and the medicalization behind intersex kind of makes it more okay for us to explore, a hormone regimen that works for us. I don't know, that kind of two-facedness within the medical community regarding intersex and trans healthcare is it's really unsettling. It's leaves a bad taste in my mouth, and it's frustrating.
Basically put, things are complicated. It frustrates me to no end that our society places such emphasis on the idea that what is normal is good. I really wish the word normal simply meant the thing that happens 50% plus one of the time. I think on one level I kind of understand the impulse. Our lizard brains crave easy explanations and things that can be easily categorized. Understanding the impulse, though, doesn't mean excusing the impulse. The drive to push everyone towards quote-unquote normal has real consequences for people who fall outside of our standard of normalcy. We make decisions on their behalf that deny them their bodily autonomy. We deny them ownership of their bodies and sexualities. This is not okay. If there's anything I want you to take away from this piece, it's that. I'm guessing if you've stuck around listening to this episode long enough to hear my little ending monologue here, you're a person who's open to the idea of embracing and making space for difference. What I would encourage you to do is go out into the world and do your best to carve out that space for the rest of us, if that's something you're able to do. Most marginalized people are not actually harmed by their differences. They're harmed by society's intolerance of their differences. We simply refuse to create space for them. It doesn't have to be like this. We can and should be better. More Gay Atheist Manifesto after the break. We interrupt our show once again to shamelessly beg for your money. Bringing about the downfall of society is a great burden on one's time, emotional stability, and of course the wallet. This is something Ron, Robert, Dick Whistle, Elena, and Brandon totally get. This week, their money is going toward conversion therapy. Yes, we have hired a crack team of behaviorists who will bully, browbeat, and shame the straights and the cis until they recognize who God truly meant them to be. This is important work and we need your help. Check out patreon.com/thegaytheistmanifesto for more. By the way, Elena is trying to raise money to help fund her transition. I'll have a link in the show notes to her fundraising page. Please, if you can spare a few bucks, check out the show notes for a link and let's help her out, okay? And now an excerpt from this week's patrons-only audio journal. Often, when we talk about activism and we're trying to convince people to take one action or another in support of our cause, I think we really should be telling stories. A lot of times we just kind of throw out the talking points. We make arguments, we make points, we debate. And there most certainly is a place for those things in activism. I'm definitely not denigrating the value of debate and discussion. What I'm really trying to point out is that we underutilize storytelling. Here's an example. Head over to patreon.com/thegaytheistmanifesto for this and unedited interviews with all of the guests from today. Thank you. What can we do? That's probably the most common question I've heard from people since the election. What can we do to stop the avalanche of absolute awfulness coming from Washington? That's alliteration. You like that? And there are tons of lists out there, and most of the things on those lists are predictable. Doesn't mean they're bad things. They're just things that we would normally think of. Vote, call your congressperson, give money, volunteer, so on. There's another one you hear maybe slightly less often, and that's to actually run for elected office. There are a lot of people deciding to run for office for the first time. There's even an organization dedicated to electing atheists to public office all across the country. It was founded by a guy named Andre Saleh.
I've spent the past few years of my life working in politics. In this past election cycle, I had the privilege of working with 11 candidates, most of whom were openly non-believers, and several of those seats were won. So I guess what sort of ended up spurring this project as a separate thing was looking at Arizona, where I am, and recognizing that over the course of the past few years with persistence and applying what we've learned cycle after cycle on how to get non-believers elected to public office, we've actually been successful. We have the only religiously non-affiliated member of Congress. I live in a legislative district where 2 out of the 3 legislators are non-believers, and the other one just doesn't care. We elected a non-believer to the city council of the most conservative city in the country. We have a couple of non-believers on school boards here. So what I wanted to do, especially after seeing the results this past November, and recognizing that we've just put Mike Pence into the White House, I wanted to take what we've learned in Arizona and the successes that we've had here and try to apply them nationally where we can. And it takes baby steps. And part of that is just getting people filed to run for office. And that's mainly what this project is focusing on.
The candidates who are running are mostly running at a local level. And the interesting thing about many of the local races is that the incumbent has often run unopposed in the last several elections. So they get comfortable. Aaron Ra is running for the Texas State Senate in District 2, and he told me this was actually a big part of the reason he decided to run.
The guy that I'm running against has won the last 2 elections for his seat. I think it was 2, because there was no Democratic candidate running against him. There hasn't been a Democratic candidate for this district in several years. And so this is just because nobody ran. So I was the first to throw my hat in the ring and get a campaign started and get everything in a row. There will be a primary this time because there were a whole bunch of people that were woke up by the Trump election, so that all of the grassroots activists and all of that are overwhelmed with support this time around that they haven't really seen before. So the candidate or the other candidate in the primary is a pretty strong one. There were actually 4, I think, other candidates that jumped in the ring, and the 3 of them have dropped out. So it's just me and one other person now.
I spoke with 2 other candidates. Shawnee Rios is running for city council in Knoxville, Tennessee in District 6, and Adam Collins is running for city council in Hamilton, Ohio. I put the same question to each of them. Here's Shawnee.
I've had people tell me for a long time that I should run for office. And I always, especially me being a loud, vocal atheist in the Bible Belt, I always thought, okay, this is probably a horrible idea. I should never do it. And then after Trump got elected, I noticed a lot going on here in Knoxville, a lot of activism and advocacy, which I've done that for years. But I thought, you know what, let's take it to the next level. I really can't sit back and demand change if I have the ability to actually go in and affect it.
And here's Adam.
Well, it's always an idea I've toyed with, but the thing that sent me over the edge was Donald Trump getting elected to the presidency. Because, I mean, for like the past 7 or 8 years, I've been a pretty hardcore atheist and liberal activist, so I tried everything I could to sway people from voting for him. And he still got elected, so I got to step up my game and try something other than just internet activism. I got to actually get within the system and try to fix it from there.
And of course, I was definitely not surprised to hear the name of the orange man of whom we do not speak. If there can be at all a silver lining in this sort of awful, shitty mess, it's that people are motivated, right? There's obviously a huge uphill battle to fight here, and being an open atheist can make that just that much harder. Here's Aaron Ra again.
I realize every aspect of what a long shot that's going to be. I know that I'm going to have to campaign in churches. I mean, look at me. I mean, you know, and it's like earlier in this most recent election in Austin, which is the bluest state the bluest city in the state. Somebody said, one of the senators running said, don't vote for my opponent because she's an admitted atheist. And really, that's what you're still going to be able to say in this time. So if you're talking to somebody that has been an atheist activist forever, and I'm president of Atheist Alliance of America, how are you going to use the thing that I'm an admitted atheist and you make it out like that? You know that you're going to make that a platform issue, and that I'm going to be all about challenging that. So and I'm going to be good at it. So you don't want to bring on that fight.
Shawnee Rios isn't much interested in hiding either.
When the Knoxville News Sentinel ran the article on the first round of candidates that came out, I was, of course, which District 6 is the last district. So we put that at the end. Then my last name is Rios. Let's put me at the end, too. So I'm at the very, very bottom, but it specifically says in there that I am Treasurer of the Atheist Society of Knoxville, Rationalist of East Tennessee, and Freedom from Religion Foundation. I would not hide my atheism. And I've even been told by atheists, why don't you, hide that? I wouldn't hide the fact that I was a female. If I was black, I wouldn't hide that fact. If I was a member of the LGBT community versus an ally, I certainly wouldn't hide that. So why would I hide my atheism? It's part of who I am. It has nothing to do with my platform, but it is who I am as a person. To me, it's very important.
And here's Adam Collins again.
I don't plan on making it part of my platform, but I also won't shy away from it if asked. I am a very strong believer in the separation of church and state, so I don't think anybody's religious beliefs, whether they have religious beliefs or lack religious beliefs, should have any bearing or weight whatsoever on how they work in the government. So if somebody asks me, sure, I'll talk to them about it, and I'm not going to shy away. I will use the term atheist, absolutely, but it's not something I'm going to push in my platform because I think it's irrelevant to the campaign. Now,
some might suggest it's better to leave atheism completely aside and just run on the issues and values that would shape whatever job they were running for. And of course, we're playing to respectability politics, and I hate respectability politics. It shouldn't be scary to be an atheist in a political campaign. And I asked Andre Soleil of the Atheist Candidate Project about the stigma that the word atheist has attached to it.
I have received the feedback that it's divisive, but it is actually strategic. There's a reason I use the term atheist. And when I was mentioning how we get people in front of candidates when we're talking about a political market where that word hasn't really had an opportunity to become irrelevant, that word is actually an effective way to put candidates in front of people. So Arizona, again, the state where I've been doing this for a few years, is a bit of an oddball, but the rest of the country, for the most part, still has a lot of trouble with atheists running for public office. So using the word atheist will, one, latch onto a word that people are already familiar with, two, latches onto a word that's controversial, and three, will help to reduce the barrier of someone with that name, with that label running in the future. We're presenting this word that people already have negative associations with as human beings, and attempting to humanize these individuals and show them values associated with someone who uses this label proudly. And I think that's important. And what we found is when we put these folks in front of people, when we give them an opportunity to ask questions and to relate with them and build rapport, their values actually transcend their labels, which is something I think that we've noticed with, you look at political conflicts between various denominations of Christianity. When their values align, it doesn't really matter what type of Christian they are. And it's the same situation with non-believers. Our values aren't all that different from what we would consider to be mainstream American values of, classical liberalism and individual freedom and like maximizing personal liberty and things of this nature. So when we get the candidates put in front of a voter, when they're going door to door, when they're talking to them as a genuine human being, that's how we bridge that gap. So that was the biggest thing that we learned, is that the label isn't actually the biggest obstacle. The biggest obstacle is actually getting the candidate in front of people, and that's how it is with pretty much any campaign.
I kind of love this idea. Let's not make atheism the core issue of the campaign, but let's not shy away from it either. I think it's also important to point out that in not one of my interviews did any of the candidates say their atheism specifically was the reason they were running. There are people who are passionate about the issues. They care about making things better. They also happen to be atheists and aren't interested in hiding who they are. I love it. As the head of the Atheist Candidate Project, Andre Soleil has heard lots of stories about why people want to run for elected office.
You find folks who are running because it's related to their atheism, but oftentimes it's for other reasons. It's most typically for other reasons, and I think that says something very important about one of the messages that I think we want to get across to voters is the fact that our atheism is just what we don't believe. It doesn't say anything about what we believe or what really matters to us. So we look at Ryan Winkle, who ran in Mesa. He ran for the Mesa City Council and won. He wanted to give back to his city, so it had nothing to do with him being part of a marginalized minority. He just happened to be a member of a marginalized minority who decided, enough is enough, and I want to do my part, and I'm not going to let my labels be a barrier. But we have folks. There's a candidate in Texas who's openly atheist, who is also a trans woman who's running in Texas of all states for very obvious reasons. We have a lot of hostility towards trans people in the United States, and this is a reality that seems to be getting worse before it gets better. We have a candidate who was inspired specifically by Donald Trump's election, who's running in Texas for Congress. Another candidate who is running for school board because of Betsy DeVos. So there's a lot of it is reactionary, but we see it really is a mixed bag. It's not just one particular set of things. It's a lot of people who have decided that if they have reasons they want to give back to their community, or they're part of a group that is marginalized, or they've identified individuals who are suffering and they want to be a part of changing that, or they just feel that if they don't run, they can't expect anyone else to. And those are all perfectly fine reasons.
Now, I do wonder sometimes, though, about people's qualifications. I wonder, is this person just trying to make a point? Do they think they're actually qualified? Are they going to do harm by running? I worry about them being, unprepared and unprofessional. Then, of course, I remember who just got elected president. Not that that's a high bar to set, but I'm sure you know what I'm getting at. And I asked Andre about that.
Reality is a lot of folks aren't going to be qualified to run for these offices, but there's still that doesn't mean that they ought not to run. So there's a couple of strategic approaches with this. With candidates who are most certainly qualified to run for office, who are in a place where they can win a seat in some public office, that candidate is going to be getting whatever support they need to be successful. We're going to try to put a whole bunch of volunteers behind them, and try to ensure that they get that seat. But there are some who are running in a place where they just simply cannot win. It's just not going to happen. And in the case of that candidate, they don't need to be the most qualified candidate for public office in order to move the Overton window. So I'm sure you've heard Dave Silverman talk about this and the use of atheist online, and every time he shows up on Fox, searches for atheist go up, and the new floor for the searches stays higher than before. That's kind of what we're attempting to do here. So you look at a campaign like let's use Aaron Ra's campaign as a really good example, and I'm sure when you get a chance to talk to Aaron, he'll tell you all about his opponent. But his opponent is batshit crazy, to the point that he actually called the Republican he ran against in the last primary inspired by Satan. So the other Republican was inspired by Satan. What is this guy going to think of Aaron Ra, right? So Aaron's running against this guy, and let's not kid. His district's going to be rough. It's going to be difficult, but he intends to run a campaign as if he wants to win. But Aaron has an opportunity that a lot of candidates do not, and it's an opportunity that we often overlook if it's not something where we can actually win a seat. People say, well, if you're not winning a seat, then there's no point, or you're just wasting resources. Well, no, these candidates have an opportunity to actually promote cultural change. They can be the most genuine candidates you can stick on a ballot, because their whole function there is to change the electorate, to promote a more progressive world, to promote a more tolerant world, and to do it in a way that is genuine and in honestly a little more aggressive than what you might expect from a more middle of the road district. So there are benefits to having candidates who cannot win a seat, and those candidates will absolutely be leveraging that opportunity to try to change the way our electorate and just the public in general views non-believers in our role in society.
Now, I also put this question to the candidates I spoke to. Here's Shawnee Rios.
I'm in it to win it. I'm in to win. I wouldn't have started. I wouldn't be. My thing, especially at this level, I have a lot of people that are donating to me and to my campaign. A lot of people that are, they're putting out their personal and private time to help me out. And if I was just running to make a point or to prove a point, I would be using them and not doing them any favors. So I am definitely in, hopefully make it through the primaries and all the way through to November.
And Aaron Ra makes a great point about the incumbent politicians not really demonstrating competence themselves.
Well, there's a number of indicators of competence for a politician, and I think many of the establishment politicians, I dare say most of the ones that we hear about, don't show that they have any competence after many, many years of experience. And sometimes you need to have maybe limits on the number of years that you can have an incompetent politician remain in office. We're looking at the Senate and everything. I think when you get somebody that is inexperienced in politics, very often you might actually get a hold of an idealist. Somebody who actually wants to make things work. And then you've got an option whether that person becomes disillusioned because they're unable to do what they want to do, can happen. And then you get the people that can. And if let's say it's a risk and you can't tell which side of this I'm on, given the current situation, we looked at Obama once upon a time and we said, okay, well, things got to change. And he's promising, a change we can believe in. And to be honest, 8 years later, I'm thinking, I don't believe I've seen that much change. But I think people look at me and say, well, that's different. And so it's pretty obviously going to be a change. And the change can only be for the better, I think, because regardless, what can people be saying? Well, I can't elect him because he doesn't believe what I do, or I can't believe I can't elect him because he doesn't look the part, or I can't elect him because he doesn't have any experience. Listen to the presentations. Follow me on policy. And you'll realize very quickly is that at least this guy, if I want to have a voice, if he's supposed to be my voice in government, I think I would have a voice in government if I elect this guy versus if I elect that one. Because if I know already that if I elect that one, it's going to be the same old, and I can go to their office and I can protest and I can say this is what needs to be done, and they'll just stare at me as if I'm an underling and say, get out, we're going to do what we were going to do anyway. But if I vote for Aaron, they might actually listen to me.
And of course, let's remember, we're not talking about the United States Congress or the presidency for that matter here. It's not as if the positions these folks are running for aren't important, but as Adam Collins points out, we're starting at the lower levels of office with the intention of working our way up. Almost all politicians do that.
Anybody they voted for at one time didn't have any political experience, and they gained some by getting into office. So I'm just starting at a low level, and if they give me a chance, I think that they'll be pleasantly surprised.
I'm honestly pretty excited for this phenomenon. I think it's a cool way to get people in office who will hopefully be pushing for evidence-based good policy. They'll be pushing positive, progressive values, and at the same time removing some of the stigma that society places on the word atheist, making it a little easier for all of us. We're going to be keeping up with the folks we talked to for this piece as their elections get closer. Aaron's election isn't until 2018, but Shawnee and Adam are both looking at November of this year. As the time for elections get closer and campaigns start ramping up, we'll check in with them from time to time to look at the mechanics of their campaigns and see how they're doing. In the meantime, if all of this sounds interesting to you, here's more from Andre Sillay on how you can get involved.
We, on the website, on atheistcandidates.com, we've actually rolled out a new feature that's going to begin providing a state-by-state breakdown of all of the folks who are running as soon as we get them filed and they're all declared for their public offices. So for people who are interested in finding a campaign or saying what's going on in their state, or maybe they're part of the media and they want to reach out and contact the candidate, whatever it may be, they'll be able to go to the website, scroll down, find their state, and just click on it, and they'll get a list of everyone who's running and their contact information, how to get in touch with their campaign, and all of that good stuff. So the website is ever so slowly being improved, and we're adding new features, but that also does require resources, which is, now is the time I make the pitch. But politics is very expensive, and if anyone wants to contribute anything, that'll help us go a long distance. I mean, we're talking about $5 will help cover some postage, $100 will help to cover part of a plane ticket, or put a candidate in front of a photographer for an hour for $100 if we find someone who's cheap. So there are costs associated with this stuff, and things like photographers and transportation costs and postage these are all things that are vital to a campaign. You can't really dispose of this stuff if you want the campaign to look like it's being run professionally. So I've been largely bankrolling the project on my own income for the past few months, and I finally did this past few days pay myself a whopping $359 for the past couple of months. So I'm rolling in those $300, but that's keeping me alive, and the money that people can kick in to help fund this project will ensure that I don't completely burn through my savings, but that we get to provide resources to an ever-growing number of candidates to help them be successful nationwide. And what I hope to achieve is enough funding that we can actually not just get candidates registered to run, but that we can provide field organizers and professional resources to candidates. A minimum of 5 candidates in every state across the country is my goal.
Once again this week, we are ending with some happy... I think I'm going to make this a regular thing with the new format. Let's just end at least most of our episodes with that. I think I'm going to call it the weekly happy. I like that. So this week's happiness comes to us from the gaming world. Weird, right? I know for my part, when I hear about almost anything in gaming involving gender or LGBT issues, I brace myself for something terrible, because it just often is. And maybe that's a bad attitude to have. Maybe that's wrong. I don't know. There's this really cool retro 8-bit game called Shovel Knight. It's kind of an homage to the old NES games like Mega Man, Mario, Castlevania, stuff like that. They were in the news a few years back because they ran a wildly successful Kickstarter campaign. They launched with a $75,000 goal and ended up raising well over $300,000, which leads me to why we're talking about it this week. On a crowdfunding campaign, there are these things called stretch goals. And basically, these are goals that say, if we go beyond our initial goal, if we hit this set amount of money, this is something extra we can do. One of these stretch goals was to get the options for body swapping for characters, specifically for a more feminine or masculine look. They posted on their blog about the thinking and the process behind adding body swapping, and I thought it was really cool. So I reached out to the developer, which is Yacht Club Games, and I got to talk with David, who's one of their programmers.
When we came up with the designs, we sort of almost accidentally created all men. I think because we were inspired by Mega Man, and that's where we were coming from. And while we were doing that, we were just we feel like we could do one better. And the thing we were looking at the time was the Adventure Time cartoon, where they had done an episode where they body swapped the characters. And we just thought, oh wow, that's a really cool way to do this. And it would be a fun way to just so everyone could, they could play with the gender of their choice, and also just see more cool designs, from our point of view. Seeing all the designs from the different angles is really neat.
And I asked David about the design process itself, and I kind of squeed with joy to hear him describe the thinking behind what they were doing.
So there were sort of key pillars we were sticking behind in creating them. One was that we were creating body swaps, and we wanted to differentiate that from gender swaps. So it wasn't we're making male and female. We were trying to fit them along the spectrum of male and female, or masculine and femininity. So if a character didn't look like they were masculine or feminine necessarily, then we would create an alternate body where they didn't look masculine or feminine. But if they looked super sexy, then we would create the alternate body would also be super sexy. That was one of the rules we made. We also wanted to make sure none of them looked like they were cross-dressing. It wasn't all of a sudden they put on a hat that made them look female and now they took on the other gender or whatever, or now they put on a skirt so they're a female, or they what makes you look male, like a big ass belt or something. So that was another rule. We wanted to make sure that we were consistent in their personalities of the character. So if a character looked mean as a female, they would look mean as a male, right? We wanted to make sure that the gameplay was consistent. So that had more to do with the design of it, in particular, how their sprites worked in the game. So if a character's really boxy, they need to continue to be very boxy in order so when you strike with your attack, they can be hit in the same exact location and not look weird. Or vice the opposite, where if they're attacking you, all of a sudden their arm can't be twice as long, or you'd be getting hit out of nowhere and it would seem unfair. So it was, making sure that their general form and shapes were the same in order to keep the gameplay consistent. A big thing was just making sure that they're differentiable. So when it gets down to being in pixel form, you lose a lot of the details you might lose in a full illustration or a concept. So making sure once it gets crunched down, you could actually tell the difference between the two bodies. And then I think the last thing was just making sure that both versions were super cool, right? We didn't want anyone to look at one body and go that's inferior to the other one. So that was the general rules we were using to design these.
I was pretty floored by this. Again, I should point out I'm not a hardcore gamer. I play casually and I enjoy games, but I've never identified myself as a gamer. But all the news I read about gaming and gender and sexuality just seems to be just terrible. For example, there was an expansion for the game Baldur's Gate that included a trans character. As I understand it, she was a shopkeeper, a very minor character, and there was one line of questioning and talking with this character that leads the player to discover she's trans, and the internet lost its fucking mind. Here's an actual quote from a Reddit post whining about the very existence of a trans character in a game. Ladies and gentlemen, we are indeed in a brave new world where even our most innocent diversions are stomping grounds for leftist activism. Yes, the very existence of a trans character is leftist activism. fantastic. Someone even uploaded a video of themselves killing the character after she reveals she's trans. It got 350 likes and 13,000 views. People littered review sites with bad reviews of this game expansion. Strangely enough, the only site that had positive reviews was the site that required people to own the game to review it. And there are lots of other stories like this, which is why I was so refreshed to read about the kind of forward thinking involved in this body swapping with Shovel Knight. I asked David for his thoughts on this phenomenon.
I think it's something that's definitely being thought about a lot more now. And I mean, you're starting to see some of the changes, like, Horizon Zero Dawn stars, like, a game that just came out stars a female character. And, almost every character you encounter is, like, a not white male. Which is like pretty rare. I mean, you see that. I think you're starting to see that a lot more in games. Not to say like the problem is solved or anything, but it's very clear to me, at least, that you can tell that designers are thinking about it when they starting a game these days.
As a sort of joking last question, I asked David if we would get to see a canonically trans character in the sequel to Shovel Knight. And I seriously just asked the question as sort of a friendly, ribbing, joking kind of question. I didn't expect a serious answer, but David impressed me again.
This was actually an interesting process because we don't have much of an emphasis on gender or sex or anything like that in our game, right? I would say like a lot of people were surprised when we did this post just to see, oh, that character is like, you think they're this gender and I thought they were that gender. So, I would think going forward, like I actually wouldn't say that there isn't a trans character in the game right now. It's just like we don't actually push that as a thing you recognize, if that makes sense. There might be gay or straight or whatever characters, like, like particularly with Shovel Knight and Shield Knight, like a lot of people see that as a romantic relationship, but we did our best to make it not that, or at least not, you can't go, no one can say for sure that it is, because like when we grew up and played games, like, when Mario went after Peach, the princess, you wouldn't, I think as a young kid, you didn't necessarily see them as lovers because that's like not a thing that even encountered, like not even triggers in your brain, right? We just sort of saw it at, you could sort of put, because it's like so little information is given to you, you could sort of put whatever you wanted onto that. You can make them brother or sister, you could make them gay or straight, you can really like make it your own. And that's our goal. I guess hopefully we would have a trans character in there, but I think we would try to stick to the same principles that we're not forcing you to see it any one way.
This just makes my queer little heart so happy. I'm not even a gamer, and it just makes me so happy. And by the way, Shovel Knight is also a legitimately really cool game. I've only played it a little bit, but it's really, really fun. So if that's the kind of game that you're into, if you like the retro 8-bit sort of old school Nintendo side-scrolling games, I would definitely encourage you to check it out. And that, my friends, is going to do it for this episode of the Atheist Manifesto. Definitely want to say thanks to everyone who contributed to the episode. Big shout out to Ingrid for bringing us the Shovel Knight story. You can find the show on Facebook at facebook.com/thegaytheistmanifesto. You can email us at thegaytheistmanifesto@gmail.com. I'm on Twitter at GaytheistCallie. You can find the show on Twitter at TheGaytheists. And let's have a moment of silence to mourn the absence of Ari's outro. If you want to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/thegaytheistmanifesto and make a per episode donation to help us out. You get access to my audio journal and unedited interviews with all of our guests. If that's not something that's doable, you can always head over to iTunes and give us a 5-star review. That is super, super helpful. Before we go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is the Atheist Manifesto.